Welcome to Berg Mountain University and our 10th consideration on those of native descent who more than most considered sovereignty within themselves as most seem may have never elevated on an English scale as they had in their first tongue, but Chapter 10 and the concept of unconditional surrender are explored further now.
10th consideration. Concept of unconditional surrender. What else is America but a belief in liberty where we may roam from state to state and sea to shine I-9 in traffic and trade with others? As surely most hadn't received a calling for missionary work, people generally smile when interaction outside of one's family benefits them in one way or another. Natives bartered things such as furs, pelts, fish, hides, seashells and meat, but also handcrafted products like woven mats, pottery and baskets. English traded for those items metal, alcohol, fabrics, guns, hides and furs, ready-to-eat foods, rawhide strips, and medicinal plants. In the wilderness we told time by the position of the sun whereat high trees casts shadows due north in relation to one's position, orientation, or even a paper clip held perpendicular to a flat surface. Initially, as native charity to refugees from other lands, English in need welcomed easements on the countryside abandoned as growth, development, corn, cotton, and cattle made settlers more of men than they once were. Growing accustomed to English trade came with the sacrifice of liberty as weapons issued were done so with position and direction. It is not weapons then were expensive as under the barter system things costed others as currency is a national concept where French francs are worth little outside France. As taking the liberty to do one thing or the other isn't so under a monarchy where everything is done for king and country. In theory all who speak English, French, Mandarin or whatever side with those more social than not where rhetoric grabs and forces men to its will. The concept of unconditional surrender is so from hindered liberty associated with nationalism, concurrence with literature and loyalty to causes with which one may disagree.
The concept of unconditional surrender is so from hindered liberty associated with nationalism where peace between those associated finds comfort in tomorrow under whomsoever is sovereign at the time. The body of those associated in the wilderness grew from mutually beneficial relationships as neighbors who by definition are others but equals striving to achieve. But without one seeing one's neighbor's sovereign as his or hers there is but hope and prayer that both may be justified. One hopes and prays his neighbor returns with news promoting a brighter tomorrow with the understanding that living somewhere in Tennessee without streetlights is unfortunate, but without making steps to brighter tomorrows how else could we prove the day was won? There comes a time when either one or his/her neighbor will move to erect a fence that doesn't mean one's neighbor is considered adverse, but some things are more private than others. Unconditional surrender requires the disclosure of information preferred not distributed including poetry. Whereas the gospel is as well considered poetic, so too does fiction add to the girth of literature in any language a story possesses. Just as Spanish names are more agreeable to Spanish speakers, natives were natives and English were English. I have never wanted for anything in my life, though considered poor, but attributed to this nation, I can't say that taxes paid went where they ought not. We as a body though neglecting the obvious, vote in a manner which is more so satisfying than morally right or monetarily compensated. Everyone does this though bias repeatedly which is why we are as wrong as any other could be.
The concept of unconditional surrender is so from hindered liberty associated with a forced tendency to concur with literature in reading for comprehension. Just because one's name is X, reading a book with his or her name, X, whether protagonist, antagonist, or supporting cast we tend to be more so concerned, if X is loved or hated. Seeing literature unfold in reality presenting circumstantial evidence, as it's almost funny witnessing those who hadn't read stories reviewed by those who had. Taking us with Alice down that rabbit hole was only adventurously exciting read, because the heroine and those reading afterwards had a rough ride that ended in another day to come. Other stories being tragic where fewer prefer names of antagonists, but if so often Williams, Georges, Roberts, Edwards and others like biological machine rewarded do so relatively as much as they think they ought, because they're noble if in name only. Noble people think we are just born into positions, but without understanding why one should side more with one than another is beyond us. Just like whenever there is a Mary or Joseph there is not far off a Christopher, stories have a gravity that pull individual closer that we call families. Why people think natives didn't leave battle victorious and rush home to rock their babies to sleep is beyond us. Natives didn't per se get paid to wait on war, as they had few standing armies where soldiers were paid wages to support soldiers' families back home as we do now. Women nurtured babies and supported care of women, while men protected women and elderly from harm. So, this unconditional surrender that of all one's reading has another's name falling in line with the story, the only possible outcome conceivable becomes submission to a train of thought written. Bound by circumstantial evidence we see glass ceilings fall as others realize that just because something happens in a story, doesn't mean it will repeat it in subsequent life. Lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place, but the written word does so repeatedly, aggressively, and indefinitely in theory as what we eat of when not eating of bread and wine alone. Bound to a kingdom through nomenclature the written reiteration of whatever X is adds to the longevity of a story and the legacy of the Christ for lack of a better substitute unless Mossberg would rather be used.
The concept of unconditional surrender is so from hindered liberty associated with party loyalties to causes with which one may not fully agree. Many don't understand that there was much more interaction, commerce, and study between natives than was thought by those more scholarly without any firearms. We didn't mention last week because giving all due respect, we would prefer not mentioning something or someone with which we know others may disagree. This is a short conclusion, but
Having such a mindset humbles me, and the concept of unconditional surrender is so from hindered liberty associated with nationalism, inescapable we remain.
That concludes the information for this session. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and hope you return again next week as we discuss the 11th prerequisite in the concept of loss. We'll see you there. Thanks and have a great day.